You know, every time you buy a coffee, stream a show, or even just pay your rent, you're doing way more than just spending money. You're actually casting a vote, sending a signal that shapes the entire global economy. So let's dive in and see just how powerful you, the consumer, really are. How about this for a number? $11 trillion. That's how much American consumers spent on goods and services in just a single year back in 2012. And to put that into perspective, that spending accounted for more than 2/3 of the entire U.S. economy. That's huge. And what that really means is that your choices, your confidence, your willingness to spend, well, that's the engine of the whole national economy. When people like you and me are spending, the economy grows. When we pull back, it slows down. The bottom line, you are absolutely in the driver's seat. So let's just make sure we're all on the same page. What is a consumer? Well, pretty simply, it's anyone buying stuff for personal use. You're not a business, you're what economists call a household. And all of us together, we create the demand that makes the whole market go round. But that power isn't spread out evenly. If you look at this breakdown, you can see housing is the real giant here, taking up a full third of the pie. That's where our spending has its single biggest impact, followed by things like transportation and food. Okay, so we've established that the consumer has a ton of power, but that power always operates within a bigger system, a game with its own set of rules. So let's take a look at the three big economic systems that have really shaped our modern world. See, every single economic system is trying to answer the same basic questions. What stuff gets made? How does it get made? And who gets the stuff once it's made? The rules of the game are really just different ways of answering those fundamental questions. And right here, you can see the core differences. In capitalism, it's all about private individuals and companies owning and controlling production. In socialism, the public, usually through the government, controls the key resources. And in communism, the government pretty much owns and controls everything. Each system gives the consumer a totally different role and level of influence. And you can really see these systems in practice. On the left, that's state-controlled tobacco farming in Cuba, a classic command economy. But on the right, you've got a busy market in China, a country that brought market principles into its communist system and just unleashed incredible economic change. So, how did capitalism end up becoming the world's dominant economic system? Well, to really get that, we need to take a quick look back at how we even got here in the first place. The history of our economy is really a story of things just speeding up faster and faster. For hundreds of thousands of years, we were hunter-gatherers. Then boom, agriculture lets us create permanent settlements. Then the industrial age brings factories and mass production. And now we're in the information age, where data and technology connect pretty much everything. And this timeline really highlights the key moments that shaped modern capitalism. In 1776, you've got Adam Smith championing a hands-off approach. But then, the Great Depression of 1929 showed the system's flaws, which led to FDR's New Deal and a much bigger role for government. And finally, the invention of the web in 1989 just put globalization into hyperdrive. As capitalism grew, so did the power of these huge corporations. And for a long time, that relationship was pretty one-sided, leaving the individual consumer to kind of fend for themselves. But all that was about to change. For centuries, the prevailing attitude was summed up by this Latin phrase, caveat emptor, which means let the buyer beware. If a product was unsafe or just didn't work, well, that was your problem. The companies held all the cards and took very little responsibility. Then, in 1965, this entire idea was challenged in a huge way by a young lawyer named Rolf Nader. His book, Unsafe at Any Speed, went right after the auto industry, basically saying they cared more about fancy designs than about keeping their customers safe. It was an absolute bombshell. And Nader's book didn't just sell copies, it launched a movement. He became the face of consumer advocacy in America, creating organizations that fought for our rights in Washington and all over the country. He really helped shift the balance of power back toward the individual. Nader's work was actually building on a foundation that President John F. Kennedy had laid out just a few years earlier. In 1962, JFK outlined what he called a Consumer Bill of Rights. These four basic rights, to be safe, to be informed, to choose, and to be heard, became the guiding principles for the entire consumer protection movement. All right, so let's bring this all into the present day. The 21st century consumer, that's us, we have more rights and more choices than ever before. But we also face a whole new set of really powerful pressures. And a huge part of that pressure is debt. Just to give you a snapshot from 2012, Americans held $2.6 trillion in consumer credit. That's everything from credit cards to car loans, and that number doesn't even include mortgages. And when that debt becomes too much to handle, the consequences can be devastating. In that very same year, 2012, there were 1.2 million bankruptcy filings in the US, and the vast majority of those were from individuals and families. But even with all these pressures, consumers have found some really clever ways to band together to increase their power, and one of the most effective has been something called the consumer cooperative. So consumer co-ops are basically businesses that are owned and controlled by the very people who use them, the members. We're talking about everything from credit unions to grocery stores. They run on democratic principles and are designed to provide affordable stuff, keeping the profits inside the community instead of sending them off to distant shareholders. This idea of collective action, of working together, leads us to a final and I think really crucial point. Our power as consumers goes way beyond just the marketplace. The things we all collectively buy, use, and then throw away have a huge, lasting impact on the world around us. So I think the ultimate question for the modern consumer isn't just about price or quality anymore. It's about recognizing the incredible power we hold in our hands and asking ourselves, what kind of future are we actually building with every dollar we spend? What is our responsibility for the world we're all buying into?